Hey everybody, it's Bill from Matt-Trakker.com, and that's Dave over there. And welcome to this episode of Behind the Mask. Now, today we have a special guest with us, story editor and writer Jack Olesker. Got it. All right, good. All right. So I'm going to let you take it from here. I want you to introduce yourself and kind of go over, what you did just a very broad overview of your career, and we could dive into some M.A.S.K things after that. But you also have a new website out too. So if you want to talk about that too, feel free on the top of the show here.
Good. That's great. Thank you so much, Bill and David. And I really want to thank you for having me on your amazing site. Okay, and as I was saying, kudos to both of you for keeping M.A.S.K alive for 20 years, so it's an amazing accomplishment. I think it's going to pay benefits for you. My good friends at Kenner say that there is, I'm sure, I'm not telling you and your folks on your site anything they don't know, but there's a series in the works. I'm sorry, there's a film in the works, so I'm hoping that comes back. My good friends at He-Man.org, they've been waiting forever for He-Man to have a revival. And we know what happened the last couple of years with a couple of television series and maybe a new film coming. So I'm hoping the same thing for M.A.S.K.
Is Dolph Lundgren coming back for this He-Man movie?
Oh gosh, unless he's going to be He-Man's grandfather, I don't think so. Oh, Dolph.
But no, I appreciate that. But we'll circle back to you. And not just M.A.S.K. You've worked on a lot of things over the years, and you said it was 47 years. Is that what you said?
47 years, 1,200 episodes of television that I've written, produced, and directed, 18 films, published 7 novels, 2 of which were bestsellers. I did a stint as a president of a motion picture and television studio in Chennai, India, called Ken Creative. And, the head coach, Bear Bryant, the legendary head coach of University of Alabama, once said it's not bragging if it's true. So I don't mean to sound bragging, but that's the deal, And I was very fortunate to have been in the trenches during what I like to call the golden age of television animation, which I feel was the 80s and the 90s. My production company is very, very active. Last year was a record year for us. We were very blessed to have a record year with a number of projects that we developed, and I continue to do so. But I look back so fondly on those days, the 80s and the 90s, and just to give you a real broad stroke of how that happened. I was living in Chicago in the 1970s. Actually, I grew up there, but I was living in Chicago, and I had written a novel called No Place Like Home. And it was about an aging baseball player and for the Chicago Cubs, and his wife was a nasty person, and his kids were, really dysfunctional. He couldn't keep up with his teammates anymore, and he decided he was going to kill everybody that lives in this high rise that he was living in, and then take his own life. And when it came time to do it, he snapped. He couldn't bring himself to do it, and he started killing people that lived in the building to take the place of his family. So I knew so little about publishing. You got to remember, I was 25 years old. I sent my only copy of the manuscript to G.P. Putnam's Sons in New York in a shirt box. Okay, no computers back then. So about 2 months later, I got a nice letter back from a wonderful editor named Marcia McGill, who worked with first-time authors. And Putnam's offered me $2,000. If they had offered me 75 cents, I would have taken it to have a novel published. And Putnam's published the novel. 10 months later, it hit the bestseller list. MGM found out about the novel. great lady named Sherry Lansing, who was at the time she was at MGM. She went on to become the longest serving studio head at Paramount Motion Pictures, where she was producing films like The Accused, Fatal Attraction. She did Titanic, and she was just an amazing woman. And her and Bill Castle, who was a director and producer for a lot of B horror films from the 60s and 70s and the 50s, The Tingler, House on Haunted Hill, Dr. Sardonicus. He and Sherry bought the film rights to my novel. And I got a really significant amount of money. It was 1977, and they paid me $50,000, which back then that was really a lot of money. So I was working in my parents' clothing business, but I had always wanted to write. This is all that I did from the time I was like 7 and 8 years old. So I figured this is it. I've got golden fingers. I loaded everything I had in my little TR7, drove cross country, and got out to LA, where I knew I was going to be the next great screenwriter. Unfortunately, what I didn't realize was that there were 5,632 people a day that were coming to Los Angeles that had the same idea. So it was highly, highly competitive. And I worked as an extra on films, background extra, and I wrote for a magazine called Entrepreneur Magazine. I was a associate editor there, and I happened to live in a building in Studio City, California, that had like a lot of entertainment types living in it. Bob Eubanks, who did the Newlywed.
Oh yeah.
Great guy, wonderful poker player. My God, the guy was like 55 years old, and he was still doing rodeo, on the weekends. Great guy. And there were some soap stars living in the building, and there was this really, seemed to me, odd Frenchman who had a real strong resemblance to John Lennon. He had straight hair and everything, the glasses. And I was at a party in the building, and he knew that I was a published author. His name was Jean Chalopin. And he came up to me and he started talking, and he said, I'm starting an animation company in the United States. I've been doing it in Europe for a number of years. And would you be interested in writing for television? Well, my novels were murder mystery, a horror novel called Confessional, terrifying novel. Beyond Forever, there was an occult romance. So they were really gritty, hard-edged novels that I wrote. The Siege of Superport, that was about a group of terrorists that took over an offshore docking facility for super tankers. So when he said children's television, I said, I don't know. So I said, let me think about it. So I go to bed, and I wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning. I sit bolt upright in the bed, and I shout out, "What am I thinking?" So the next day we had lunch, and over sushi, I decided I'd start writing for television. And the first series that Jean had me write for, and I had never written a television script before, was called The Littles. And it was about these tiny little characters who were living in the walls of people's houses. And Jean lived down the hall from me on the 3rd floor of this condo building. And it was great because we were diametric opposites. He was a morning guy. He'd get up at like 5 o'clock in the morning. And I can't sleep until 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. Okay, that's why we're doing this interview at night. So I would write all night long, and then I'd bring the script. I'd slide it under his door. He'd edit it in the morning. He'd slide it back under my door. When I got up at noon, I'd start looking at the notes. And like I said, you have to remember there was no computers back then. Okay, it was. I was so thrilled that I got a Selectric 2 typewriter with the liftoff tapes on it. I thought, this is it. It's the state of the art. It's never going to get better than this. I could throw away my whiteout. So when Jean would give me all these notes, and he was like mentoring me and showing me what to do in television. You can't have aerial shots because it means you got to animate everything down below. Please don't ever have a tiger because you can't animate the stripes. In those days you could. So when he'd have this page after page after page of notes, I'd have to retype the whole script because you couldn't just go in and cut and paste.
Yeah.
And I do that, and then I get it to him the next day. And he came to appreciate that. He was certainly not effusive in his praise, but he appreciated the fact that I was fast and I was good. And I listened, and my learning curve was really fast. And Jean was really, he was an iconic figure in television, and children's television, especially animation. And what a lot of your fans on your site probably don't know is that in the 40s and in the 50s and even into the 60s, there were no animation writers, okay, except, for feature film, okay, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, Mickey Mouse, and, okay, the Jetsons and the Flintstones, those were exceptions to the rule.
That was the 50s, right? Flintstones.
70s, for
Okay.
Jetsons, okay. But up until then, for television, it was primarily the animation artists that would write a few lines of dialogue for, Bugs Bunny and Daffy Duck, and that was it. But Jean he intuitively knew that kids were getting a lot smarter and a lot more discerning, and they wanted to have a cohesive story. So he consciously sought out people that were writers and tried to get them to write for children's television. Howard Cohn, who worked for Roger Corman on a number of films, was one of Jean's writers, and he wrote for Barbarian Women, all these low-budget Howard Roger Corman films, and he was one of the guys that came on staff. And I was really his first staff writer. We had a little studio over a beauty shop in Studio City, and I came on as a story editor for, I came on as an assistant story editor for the Care Bears. And that was my first job in television. And from there, everything else sprang. And then a year or so later, which we'll go into, I went on for M.A.S.K, which is really an interesting story that I know we'll get to.
Thanks for sharing
that's amazing.
it's funny because I watched Care Bears when I was younger, and I'm sure that a lot of what you put together was what I was watching. So it's really cool. Like all this full circle stuff. I love this. And it's really cool to see. Dave, I'm going to let you take it here. So,
okay.
Dave's going to go through, go for some questions here.
Great.
Okay.
And I'll jump in, but I love that story. And
that was great.
so let's go forward. What, about a year? You said it was? And let's jump into Mobile Armored Strike Command, or M.A.S.K as it's known.
Yep.
And why don't we look at just how you got started working on M.A.S.K? Let's just we'll start with M.A.S.K at the beginning.
That's great.
How did it start?
Well, I was on staff for about a year before M.A.S.K came to us. Studio grew just exponentially. It was, they always say on Shark Tank that it's the hockey stick business model, that it just goes like that. And that was largely because of an amazing businessman named Andy Hayward, who was the president of Jean's studio. And Jean and Andy worked hand in hand. Jean, of course, was a tremendous businessman as well. But, English was not Jean's native tongue, although he got along fine when he was speaking, but it wasn't his native tongue, and he was happy to have Andy handle a lot of business affairs. And Andy was just a consummate professional, and worked at Hanna-Barbera, and his dad, Deke Hayward, that's a whole separate story. He was a legend.
It's quite a resume, yeah.
Deke, by the way, was not named after his dad. His dad's name was Deke, and Deke was Dic, which is French for it's an acronym.
Oh, okay.
So Andy was really the guy that helped the studio grow. And all of a sudden, we started having a lot of series coming to us. I did the Care Bears, and then we had Heathcliff and the Cadillac
You love
Cats,
Heathcliff.
which was a great show that I loved. Hello Kitty's Fairy Tale Theater, and the Popples, and a lot of different shows that I was story editing and that I was writing for. And one of the things that Andy and Jean did, which was a very unusual business model, and I can't think of any other, maybe they're out there, but I can't think of any other studio that did the same thing. When you got brought on as a story editor, and as a story editor, you used writers and they wrote the scripts for you. You took them through writing story springboards, and you submitted them to Andy and Jean and a wonderful lady named Lori Crawford, who was really the director of entertainment. And then we'd get back approvals on the story springboards, and then they would write the treatments. And then you would, as a story editor, you would alter the treatment, say, let's move this scene over here, and we get it in good shape. And then you assign them the script, and they would hand in the scripts. And you had maybe a team of 6 or 7 writers that were your stable of writers that you could depend on. And what John and Andy did, which is, as I said, was very unusual, they paid you a really healthy salary for being a story editor. And in addition to that, it was okay with them if you would also write episodes of a show that you were story editing. And in principle, they didn't want you working on it while you were in your office. They expect you to work on it at home. But I think Andy and John probably turned a blind eye if we were doing something at the office. They were both great guys. And the brilliance of it was that if you were the story editor and you knew what the house style was for a particular show, you knew the voice of Heathcliff the cat. You knew the voice of Dinky Little. You knew the voice of Hello Kitty. So you knew how they spoke. And all of the writers didn't always know. Certainly they got like a 80-page series Bible, and they would work on that. But our job as a story editor was to take that script and put it into the house style. But what John and Andy realized was that if your story editor was writing scripts, it would eliminate or streamline the process of editing those scripts, because nobody knew the story as well as the story editors. So we were thrilled because, we were making our salary plus, a little money on the side for writing scripts. So I had just come off doing episodes of, I was writing episodes for Hello Kitty Fairy Tale Theater. It was such a cute little character. And I had wrote episodes of the Littles and Heathcliff and the Cadillac Cats and the Popples. The Popples were these little fuzzy creatures that you turn inside out. It was adorable stuff. And, it was a long way from, writing horror novels and murder mysteries. So it was very, very nice. I enjoyed that. And, my mother once said, how can a young man that, writes such terrifying novels for adults, how can you write such nice little things with the Care Bears? And I said, well, you spent 6 years with the Care Bears and you'll understand, and you'll want to write a horror novel too, because they're so cute and caring and sharing. So finally, I'm sitting in my office at Deke one day in the studio. It just, like I said, it had grown exponentially. We moved into huge offices in Encino. We had post-production going on, and it was just enormous. And one day I'm in my office, and Andy walks in, and he says, I need an Olesker job. And, the thing, like Jean, Andy knew I'm a really fast writer, okay? And, I've written so many episodes of television, I've become very, very good at it. I'm sure that it's a gift that I'm so grateful for. But I'm fast and I'm good. So when he said I need an Olesker job, I knew what he meant. So I said, what's the story? He said, the story is M.A.S.K. And I had seen a couple episodes. I'm not going to say I was a M.A.S.K. aficionado, because I wasn't. you can't watch everything, So he said, we got to pick up. Deke had already done 65 episodes. That was season 1. So
Okay.
we got to pick up for Kenner. They wanted to just put a exclamation mark on the series, and we got to pick up for another 10 episodes. And what they wanted to do, which I thought was clever, we all know the Mask and the Venom storyline, but what they decided they wanted to do, you could only get so many of the vehicles. You could only get so many of the play sets. So what they decided to do, and again, I thought it was clever, was to shift it away from this battle for world domination and and Mask trying to outwit them. I love that Mask worked for the Peaceful Nations Alliance. I can't remember anything that was peaceful in Mask. I thought it was amusing. That was the name of the company that they were, or the organization they were working for. But Kenner decided they wanted to shift it to more of a racing element, and still have Venom trying to pull off their dastardly deeds, but have this race element in it. And of course, it was so many years before Fast and Furious ever broke out onto the scene. I'm very glad to hear that that they're talking about Gary Gray maybe being the director for the Mask live action film. He did the Fate of the Furious and Straight Outta Compton. So I think he'd be a great guy for it. But I digress. So Andy said, "Look, we want you to do 10 episodes." I said, "Okay, that's great." And he said, "You got 3 weeks."
Oh God.
Okay. Now I get what you're talking about. So he said, bring in one other writer, and I want you to go home. I don't even want you in the office. I want you to take the series Bible home with you, have one other writer, set up a hotline where you're calling him all the time, and you guys will each knock out 5 episodes, and you'll get, we're going to pay you $1,500 an episode, which back then that was a lot of money back then. And there's an 88-page series Bible. You got to read all of that. Here's a stack of video cassettes, no DVDs back then. He says, watch as many of the shows as you can and knock the stuff out. So, okay, so I called Ray Dryden, who wrote for me on the Care Bears, which was very different than the shows that he had produced. The Attic and the Clonus, the Parts Horror. They were horror films. And I thought it would be an interesting change for him, just like the Care Bears was a good change for him. And I knew that, like me, he wrote very quickly. So I called him up, I pitched him, and I said, "What do you think, Ray?" He said, "I think it's fabulous." He said, "It's me today. You can give me the series Bible." There was no internet back then, okay? So he said, "And we'll get working on it right away." So I said, "Sounds good." So Ray and I each had a series Bible. We each had all of these DVDs that we're shoving into our VCRs, and we're watching all this stuff. And we're just absorbing like a Vulcan mind meld. We're thinking about all this stuff with Miles Mayhem and Matt-Trakker and, oh my gosh, Vanessa, be still my beating heart. So we're learning all this stuff really fast overnight, and bang, we start writing the story springboards. And people think that in my business that we do everything with pixie dust and a magic wand. Okay.
Wait, you don't?
No, we don't.
Oh my.
Sorry to break your balloon.
You blew up mine.
You know this. You're plugging me. But it's a business like any business. Okay.
Yeah.
But sometimes, and that's when it's really fun, we do pick up a magic wand and we start going like this. And we do throw some pixie dust around. And in those 3 weeks that we were doing that, I can tell you that Ray Dryden and I were the pixie dust princes. Okay. we were just going bada boom, bada boom, bada bing, bada boom. And we're calling each other at 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning. And we're living on Folgers dry crystals. And we're just writing around the clock. And as fast as we submitted the story springboards, I'd get a call from Lori Crawford the next day. She'd say, they're all approved. Okay. I mean, the approval process was like grease lightning. And then we'd write the treatments. And 2 days later, they're approved, And I don't know how we did it, but Ray Dryden and I knocked out 5 episodes each and read the series Bibles and watched all the video cassettes. And we did that in a 3-week period. And it's, when I was in the Air Force, I was a helicopter search and rescue combat medic. They used to lower me out of a helicopter to pick up down pilots. And we went through survival training. And doing these 3 weeks of work on M.A.S.K and pounding out what we did, it was kind of like Air Force survival training. I'm glad I went through it. I sure wouldn't want to go through it again. So
I can imagine.
That's the story of how 10 episodes of M.A.S.K were written in basically 2 weeks.
Oh,
Wow. I never realized the show was written that quickly and that fast. I would have assumed that it was a much longer, more drawn out process. But
And, in a little while, when we move on to something else, I'll tell you this my story of the new adventures of He-Man, which is kind of similar to that. But that's the story on M.A.S.K. And I really came to love that show because okay, a lot of people say, oh, it was a mashup of G.I. Joe and Transformers, and not to take anything away from those towering projects. The thing that I liked about M.A.S.K was you didn't have transforming robots, okay? And all right, listen, I cared about Optimus Prime, I cared about, the different characters, but it's different when you got Matt-Trakker that's sitting inside of one of these cars with, his powerful mask on. It's different when you've got, Miles Mayhem sitting in a car and they're driving in Baja, Mexico, in one of the episodes, or in One Shining Moment, which I set in my native Chicago. They're racing along Lakeshore Drive, and they're real people. So I say real people, they're animated, but for me, they're real.
Yeah.
But you have, I believe, more of a vested interest in them because it's not a machine. Okay. A machine gets destroyed. Look, you feel bad. Every once in a while, a machine gets destroyed and it tears your heart out. The Iron Giant. Okay. It's just, it'll rip your heart out. But basically, the machine is a machine. So I was really attracted to M.A.S.K, partly because they were real villains and real heroes in the vehicles. The other thing that I thought that was very interesting, and kudos to whoever came up with the original storyline, how many James Bond films can we see? And I'm a huge James Bond fan, but how many James Bond films can we see where somebody's trying to take over the world? It's all about world domination. Okay. Venom wasn't really interested in world domination. Venom was interested in robbing the world, that's for sure. Venom was interested in pulling off, all sorts of plots that they could create mayhem for, pun intended. But they really weren't looking to dominate the world. So for me, it was on a little bit smaller level, okay? And they were looking at things differently than they looked at it in these huge world domination things. I mean, look, really, it got to the point that it began to spoof itself with world domination. With $1 million. So that Mike Myers is such a great pop and international man of mystery, but it became spoof because every single thing that we saw was world domination. So those were a couple of the elements that really drew me to M.A.S.K and had me come to have a great fondness for it.
Can I ask you a couple specific questions about M.A.S.K then?
Absolutely.
The episodes? We'll see if you remember. So it sounds like you were Battle for Baja and One Shining Moment. Do you remember any of the other ones of the 5 scripts you wrote?
It's funny that you say that. And I always say you got to remember, because a lot of people don't.
I know, it's been a long time. Do you remember?
This was 40 years ago.
I know.
I'm 40, by the way.
Okay, thanks.
Me too.
I really appreciate that. I went into Office Max a couple of weeks ago, and I was printing up a series Bible for a new show that I'm doing, and the kid behind the counter, he's like your age, and he says, I just read an article about you in the newspaper, Mr. Olesker, and you did all these shows, and you did He-Man. I said, oh, I said, that's nice that you saw that. I said, did you like He-Man? He said, no, but my dad did. I said, oh, great. So, if I don't, I've got, in the interest of transparency, I got a little cheat sheet down here, but I can't remember everything because it's
no, I didn't think you would.
1,200 episodes that I've written. So, I've only got so many file drawers, and I'm getting to an age now when the file drawers are still there, but it's getting a little rougher to pull them open. And I did some research on what you were saying today, what episodes is. You're right. And everything that I looked at on the web, it said for that series, it said writers Jack Olesker and Ray Dryden.
Yeah.
It didn't separate out who wrote what. I know I did Baja. I know I did for One Shining Moment. There was another one. I can't remember the title, but it was with the Statue of Liberty was involved in it, and that was one of the episodes. But I can't give you really specific episodes.
No, I didn't think so. I was just wondering if you just had the listing of the ones you wrote. Just because the information, it's just not available online. So even for series 1, we have a few episodes that some of the writers have come forth with, but it's always in the interest of getting the information. So
I wrote the episodes that you and your fans love, and Ray wrote all the other ones.
Yeah, all the ones I like, all the ones I think are really good, you wrote. If there's any problem with it, it's all Ray's fault. So I'm sure you'll tell the exact same. So did you ever get to see the episodes after they were finished when they aired?
Oh yeah, sure. That was wonderful, and of course we got to see them before they came on the air, which was really fun. We had rough cuts, and when I went on and started doing New Adventures of He-Man, I moved on in my career, and I was reviewing the storyboards before even the artwork began. But yeah, for M.A.S.K, we got to review everything before, which was that was a lot of fun. I enjoyed that. I should give a shout out to my longest and dearest friend. Well, 3 dear friends in the industry, but Haim Saban is one of my dearest friends in the industry, and anybody that really knows the entertainment industry knows Haim's background. He owns the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, which I created for him, and that's an interesting story. But Haim and his partner Shuki Levy did all of the music for M.A.S.K, and they did the soundtrack, and they did the music for most of the Deke shows. When you watch a Deke show, usually it's Haim Saban and Shuki Levy at the end, and there is a story in the industry that's kind of an amusing story. Haim made his first $1 million by going to John and Andy and saying, I'm going to cut you a deal where I'll do all the music for all of your shows. I'm not going to charge $1. All I want is the ASCAP royalties. And every time that show ran, Haim and Shuki collected an ASCAP royalty, and that was the joke that's how he made his first $1 million. Many, many millions to follow after that. And Haim, the nicest guy you ever want to meet. Tough businessman, but you could sit down here like we're sitting down, have a cup of coffee. He's unaffected by things, and he's just an amazing person that I've been fortunate to work with, along with Jean Chalopin and Andy Hayward as my three mentors throughout my career.
Yeah, I heard Power Rangers was pretty big. Yeah.
Yeah,
That is,
I, I think I heard of that one before too.
at that point, I had left Deke and I moved down to Palm Springs. Now computers were just starting to come in, and I was able to live where I wanted to. And I'm down in Palm Springs, and I get a phone call from Hein, and he's moaning and groaning on the phone, and he says, and again, you got to remember, in those days, in the late 70s, early 80s, you didn't have all of the thematic networks that you have nowadays. Nickelodeon was in its infancy. There was no QVC. There was no CNN. There was no Cartoon Network. You just had ABC, CBS, NBC, and this upstart Fox. And Hein had, he started his animation studio, and he was still doing music. And he calls me moaning and groaning. He says, Spielberg and Lucas and Geffen have found out you can make money in kids television. He said, they're getting all the slots. I said, there's not enough slots for me. He says, I'm going to go bankrupt and I'm going to go back to Israel. I've got a couple of falafel stands. So I said, Hein, take it easy. I said, come down to my place in Palm Springs. I said, bring Cheryl with his wife. So they come down and we go out for dinner, and then we're floating in my pool. And he's really moaning and groaning about, it's very competitive and very few slots. So about a month later, I get a call, and he says, I bought something that ran in Japan in the 70s. He says, I want you to see it. So I get in my car, I drive out to Burbank, which was where his studios were. And Ellen Levy-Sarnoff was one of his vice presidents. And she said, Hein bought 35 episodes of this show that ran in Japan in the 70s. He said the heroes are in these colorful costumes. The villains are in these ridiculous rubber outfits. He said, it's all in Japanese. Hein doesn't want you to know what the old show was about. He says he wants you to create an entirely new show. And then all he has to do is hire voiceover artists for the first 35 episodes. He spent like $10,000 for each episode. She says he'll have a whole show. I said, that's a brilliant idea. Woody Allen did something similar with a film called What's Up, Tiger Lily, where he bought the film and he dubbed dialogue. There was a different dialogue than what existed in the original film. So I said, let me see it. So she shoves it in the video cassette. Again, no DVDs back then. And I start to watch it, and it's Power Rangers. And I remember this, guys, like yesterday. I'm with Ellen, and she looks at me, and I'm like stunned. And my mouth is hanging open. And she says, what's the matter, Jack? Don't you like it? I said, don't I like it? I said, you've got outer space, you've got martial arts, you've got aliens, dinosaurs, and a witch. I said, this is the longest show on children's television. I thought I was inflating Hein's ego a little bit at that point, but obviously it turned out that I was right. So Hein, of course, after 3 years schlepping this series around that I wrote the series Bible for, finally he got a pickup at Fox Fox Network, and started Fox Kids Network from that. And then, the Power Rangers were on the floor of the Senate, and it became a worldwide phenomenon. So my wife Kim and I go to Cannes, France, twice a year for the television conventions they have there, MIPCOM and MIPTV. And now, Power Rangers is so explosive. And Hein had a booth. It's like the size of my house. And he's selling all these different shows. And I brought my son Alex, he was a baby at the time. And Hein just loves children. And he takes Alex, he's rocking him. He gives her back to Kim, gives her a little kiss on the cheek. And Hein's a big guy, so he throws his arms around me. And I go to look in my back pocket. He says, what's the matter, Jack? I said, I'm looking in my wallet to see if you and Rupert Murdoch put something in there for everything I made for you guys on Power Rangers. Rupert Murdoch was his partner. So Hein said, you did okay on that show. I said, you're right, I did. I said, it opened a lot of doors. But let me tell you, I got next to nothing for writing the series Bible. for Power Rangers. But you know what? It was at the time, it was one of 3 series Bibles that they hired me to write for. And
Mhm.
I think they really did not know what they had. And Haim was fortunate that Margaret Loesch was the
Mhm.
I think she was the executive vice president for children's television for Fox, and then of course Haim ended up owning with Rupert Murdoch. They owned Fox Kids Network, but I don't think he knew really what he had. So when I saw him in MIP, I said, Haim, I said, I'm so happy for your success. So he says, sure. He says, everybody now says, oh, Haim Saban, he's such a visionary. He said, if the show was a flop, he said they would have said that idiot Saban paid $10,000 an episode for a piece of garbage, you know. So, you know, vision is always 2020 in hindsight. But what I loved about Haim is he was a real risk taker. And I was fortunate to have him as one of my mentors.
That is just amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, and considering just what history Power Rangers, I mean, they still reference back to those original series to this day. As far as
Yep.
I'm not the biggest Power Ranger fan, but I know, like, you know, they keep drawing from that well, and there's still toys coming out based on the original Power Rangers to this day, and
I think they're in the
that goes back
18th,
to the story.
I think they're in the 18th incarnation of
Mhm.
Power Ranger series. And
Sounds about right. Yeah.
I've been so fortunate that, you know, shows that I've written for, you know, I wrote for Care Bears. There's all new episodes of Care Bears that are running. Obviously, they're doing
Yep.
on CGI now, but those shows ran for so long. And, you know, I go to the conventions and I sign these little mini posters, and, you know, people tell me, oh, Mr. Olesker, you know, you were so important in my life when I was growing up in my childhood. He says, I'm so grateful to you. And I always say, you know, writers, producers, directors, and actors are nothing without fans. I'm the one that's grateful to all of your fans that are watching now. Tim and I, we live in a little secret village carved out of a forest. And nearby, not too far from us, there's a resort community. And Chicagoans come around the lake and they go to this resort community for the weekend during the summertime. And one of our favorite watering holes is called the Stray Dog in New Buffalo, Michigan. And Kim and I are in there one night, and the owner, Mark Tenacey, every once in a while, and the place is always packed, he'll out me to Chicagoans that are coming in. So we go into Stray Dog, and it's packed. This wonderful pub,
Mhm.
and the owner, like I said, he'll out me to Chicago and says, Jack did the Power Rangers, he did the Care Bears, and I'm sitting there. There's 3 couples from Chicago on the other side of the bar, and all of a sudden I hear them chanting, "Power Rangers, Power Rangers!" They're sending me fireballs, you know, shots of Stoli. The guys, I said, "Come on over here." These guys come over. I'm arm wrestling with them, you know, and after about 2 hours, Kim and I had a wonderful evening. We start to walk out, and this one young woman comes over to me and she says, "Mr. Olesker, do you mind if I talk to you for a second?" I said, "Sure, as long as you call me Jack." I said, "Mr. Olesker's up in heaven." And he's looking down. I said, "I don't know. He was a tough businessman. Maybe he's down below looking up." I said, "What can I do for you?" So she says, "I grew up in a very dysfunctional family. My father was verbally abusive to my mother when I was growing up, and I was about 7 or 8 years old. And all week long, I waited for one thing. I waited for the Care Bears. And the bar is crowded. There's people all around laughing, having fun." And her voice chokes up. She says, "I want to thank you for saving my childhood."
Wow.
You know, I'm a tough guy. I grew up on the south side of Chicago. I told you I was in helicopter search and rescue. They used to lower me on a hoist to pick up down pilots. All of my fingers are broken. And then I went out to LA, which made everything else look like a cakewalk, you know. But this girl says to me, "You saved my childhood." You know, I was choked up. My eyes
I
are
got
red.
when you said it, I got goosebumps actually as you said
She
it.
says,
Like,
Mhm.
she says, "Do you mind if I hug you?" I said, "Honey."
Cool.
So
You better give it up.
I gave a speech at our Rotary Club about a year ago, and I told this story. And I said, "This is why writers for animation write." Okay. If you're blessed and you make a good career out of it, you make a nice living, you put food on the table and everything, that's wonderful. But to touch a child's heart to touch a young man's heart in such a way that they carry that memory with them into adulthood. And you knew that you brought a smile, you brought laughs, you entertained somebody for half an hour. That's a gift that I can't put any price tag on that.
I can definitely say that you definitely gave us more than 5.5 hours of entertainment on Mask.
I appreciate it.
To me, I mean, I think I've watched those episodes so many times as a child, and I remember when the racing series aired. I remember seeing the promo for it, and I'm like, "There's new Mask," and there's like, and like to little David, trucks were the biggest thing ever, and there's a tow truck and another new truck. I'm on board. This is gonna be the best thing ever. And like I said, I can go back to that moment to this day and be like, it still makes me so happy.
Right. It makes me happy to hear it. It makes me happy. You know, our children go, well, they're not children anymore. My son graduated from Purdue College of Engineering. He's a city engineer, and my daughter is third year at Ball State University. Our youngest is now in high school. And when all of our children were in kindergarten through first grade, I would go to the class when each of them were at that age, and I made a deal with the principal and the head of the teacher of each class. On every Thursday I do Mr. Olesker's Bookie and a Cookie Club, and I'd bring in a cookie for all 22 kids in the class, and I'd deliver it. I go, you know, bring the cookie, put it on their napkin, and then I spend an hour reading Dr. Seuss or Jane Yolen or any of these wonderful children's authors. And when I read a book, you know, I'm putting on an act and I'm jumping all over the place. And I always I'd say, oh, maybe Mr. Olesker shouldn't come back next week. They said, no, you got to come back. And I'd start to leave, and they'd swarm around me. And they'd say, oh, my cousin's in from Oregon, and my cat lost a tooth, and they're telling me these stories. And I bend down to eye level with the kids. And I'm walking out one day, and Kate Bobillo, who was, oh my gosh, I call her Saint Kate. She was the preschool teacher. And I'm walking out one day, and she calls me. She says, Jack, the students are going back into their chairs. She said, who do you think has more fun, you or the kids? I said, Kate, no contest. I said, I pay you to let me do this, okay? Because to see that smile, to see kids like that. I was at PowerCon, Val Staples, who owns He-Man.org, wonderful site. I got to plug them. You know, I've got a thread there in the vintage section. I've got 400,000 views on it. And he puts on this wonderful convention, PowerCon. Now it's expanded to all different types of series that everybody liked when they were growing up. And I'm there, and I'm signing these mini posters, and I've got people lined up like 10 and 20 deep. You know, it warms my heart. And this fella comes up, he's like your guy's age, and he's got his son with him. And he says, my son's got something for you. I said, oh, that's nice. So he reaches into his bag, and he pulls out a piece of construction paper, and his son's drawn a picture of He-Man, and then this little boy standing next to He-Man holding He-Man's hand. And he says, that's my dad, that little boy. And he says, I want to thank you for all the happiness you brought to my father when he was my age. I mean, what do you say when people say stuff like this, you know? So I'm so blessed to be in this business. People say sometimes, oh, you're lucky, Jack, you happen to be in the right place at the right time. Well, maybe I was fortunate, but you know what? I struck out a lot of times. Alex Rodriguez, over 2,000 hits, but the guy also had over 2,000 strikeouts. So, I believe that fate favors the bold. Okay. But I was blessed to have a gift that I had very young, in my blog, which I'm gonna kind of plug that in a minute. My new website. I talk about in my first blog post, I talk about how when I was 7 years old, I'm sitting in Myra Bradley elementary school, and I've got a classmate that's passing me a paper that's got a picture of a dragon, and there's a soldier in a Jeep, and he's fighting against the dragon. And I had written the scene. I didn't even know that it was a scene. And I asked him to illustrate it. I didn't know what a storyboard was. I'm 8 years old, but I've got these kids that are drawing storyboards for me. So it's all I ever wanted to do. And yeah, I was fortunate that Jean Chalopin happened to be living in the same building that I was living in. But you put the bat on your shoulder, and you swing, and you hope that you connect. And I had swung a lot of times before then and missed, and had worked on something for a year, a novel, and had it rejected. So it wasn't like I was an overnight success. But that day when I met Jean, I happened to be in the right place at the right time with the right skill set as a storyteller. But I had worked very, very hard to put myself at that place. So now I'm gonna plug my website. Can I do that?
Yeah.
Okay. So I've got a new website that just came out called Jack Olesker.com, JackOlesker.com. And if you go on there, you'll see that I have a blog that's called A Writer's Life During the Golden Age of Television Animation. And by now, my wife, Kim, who's an amazing individual, she's vice president of worldwide business for my company. And she's been after me for 2 years to write a blog. And we're so busy, I don't have time for it. But she really has been on top of me. So finally I said, okay, I'll write some blog posts, 250-word blog posts. Started writing them, after like a month, I've got 198 blog posts. Okay, so it just started flowing, and I'm talking about all of my career like I am about you. So I hope some of your fans, I can tell you that M.A.S.K is a big part of my blogs, and I hope that they come over there and take a look at it. Okay, plug is over.
Yep, we'll have the link down below.
Yeah, it'll be somewhere here. I don't know where.
We'll have it in the comments. We'll get the link down below. So
I'll end up on the cutting room floor.
Yeah.
Yep. Well, Bill's got plenty to cut with me being in the video. In fact, it'll be the big black hole Dave wants.
Oh boy.
So,
Well, I want to circle back. As you were talking, a question popped in my head that I didn't have before. And when season 1 ended, and then you picked up and you were working on season 2, was the directive that M.A.S.K and Venom knew each other? Because they did at that point.
yes.
Matt would talk to Miles, and there would be that interaction. But before, Matt, they knew who Venom was, but Venom didn't know who M.A.S.K was. I was just wondering if you had any insight on that, or if it was something you remember.
Not every, but many series, including He-Man, has numerous incarnations. He-Man had a comic book, just like M.A.S.K had a comic book. And, you find out things once you get involved with the canon. And what you find out later on is that not only did they know each other, but M.A.S.K and Venom worked for Cobra. Okay, they handled Black Ops for Cobra. So and for Team Joe. I mean, obviously, they reinvented the history, but that kind of solidified it. And I'll tell you what, some people might not like that. I really liked it. I liked the fact that they kind of not only knew each other, but had worked together. And, in the comic, Miles killed Matt's brother. Okay. So a lot of that stuff, may not come through in the comic, but I think it's great. there's a little bit of Darth Vader and Luke there. That, I'm not your father, but we work together and we know each other, and you see this throughout the history of entertainment. Back to King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. When his knight, Prince Malagot, left the Round Table, he was originally at the Round Table. So, Lancelot, who dallied with Guinevere, kind of betrayed Arthur. So I like those serpentine and Byzantine kind of interrelationships. Now, to answer your question, I didn't put that in there, but I knew about it. Okay. And when I do my homework, I do my homework. My third novel was called The Young Dragons. It was about two brothers that lived in Sichuan province in China in the 1800s, and they come over to California. They get involved in the gold rush and building the transcontinental railroad and importing and exporting, and so much history. When I first started writing that novel, I was living in Chicago at the time, and there was an article in the Chicago Tribune. They were talking about a gang war, and the writer said it was almost like a Tong war. Well, I didn't know what the Tongs were, that they were a secret society in China, but it struck a chord with me. And I started sitting down to write this novel about 1800 San Francisco and the Chinese, and I got about a chapter into it, and I thought, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know anything about China. I've never been to San Francisco. I don't know anything about the 1800s. So I ended up doing 9 months worth of research, and I learned everything there was to know about gambling and about poppy seeds, and you name it, I learned about it. Wrapping women's feet in bandages so their feet wouldn't grow because large feet were considered unattractive. By the time I was finished, I had 900 pages of research, okay, for my novel. Now, I used maybe a quarter of it, but knowing that gave me the foundation for my novel, so that when I wrote about something, I may not say that particular piece of research, but I knew what I was talking about. And it was the same thing when it came to M.A.S.K. It was very important for me to know the history. If you don't know the history, how can you write about the future? So to answer your question, yeah, I didn't specifically put it in there, but I was certainly aware of it.
Yeah, and the funny thing is that there's people that like the idea that they know each other and people that don't.
Yep.
If you're taking, and you alluded to that earlier, if you're looking at the comics and the mini comics, they know each other, and then there's that element of it. So I think it could have been maybe a more interesting show, even more interesting than it was, as it followed through history and a lot of real life things that were happening at the time. It would have been something pretty unique that
I agree with you, Bill. The problem is, and a lot of people, I mean, you're in the entertainment business, but a lot of people that aren't in the entertainment business or aren't in a subset, which is called television, don't understand that you have 22 minutes of running time.
yeah.
It's so tight. When I bring in external characters, every time you bring in an external character or you explore a tangential storyline, you are cutting into your running time. You only have so much running time. So look, I would love to talk about all that. That's what I hope and pray happens when the M.A.S.K. film happens. Okay, now let's explore the backstory of Miles. Why do these two not like each other so much? Because not only is one Venom and the other is M.A.S.K, but they've got this history. They've got this tragic history that it's so hard to overcome it. So I hope that when the film happens, and I can tell you, I know that film's going to happen, it's too good of a franchise to not end up being a film. You've got action, you've got adventure, you've got fast cars, you've got, oh, again, Vanessa, you've got, you've got everything that you need for a fabulous film, incredible characters. So I think it's only a question of time until it gets made. I hear they're talking about bringing in G.I. Joe and stuff. I think Mask stands on its own. But I hope when that happens, that whoever the writer is, that they're going to let him have the latitude to develop that. Because like you just said, I think that's a very important part of the show. I was very fortunate. I've worked with Mattel so many times over the year. I was fortunate to work with Kenner, American Greetings, those characters from Cleveland. And I'll tell you what, the 80s and 90s gets a bad rap because everybody says, oh, it's a 30-minute commercial and you're trying to sell, toys and stuff. And Peggy Charon, who was in charge of ACT, she was an activist for children. She wanted to make sure that they weren't 30-minute commercials. And she was on the outside. I think she was well-intentioned, but she didn't know the industry. And I will tell you that every single toy executive that I ever worked with, every single production company executive that I ever worked with, never said, Jack, we want you to sell toys, okay? It was in their vested interest because they knew that the way that you would sell toys, and that was their business, was by telling an entertaining story. So they always gave me and many, many other writers that were in the children's entertainment business and in the animation business, they gave us the latitude to tell the best stories that we could tell. And that's why I'm so grateful to people like Jean Chalopin and Andy Hayward and Haim Saban and everybody at the networks, Judy Price and Phyllis Tucker Vincent, Squire Rushnell, all of these people at the networks. None of them, when I went in as a young man to meet them, none of them said, you got to sell toys. That's what funds all the shows. They knew that that's the way it was, but they wanted us to tell a good story. And I'm eternally grateful to them for that.
Yeah, you put out a good product and everything else follows after that.
Yep.
Not to take anything away from the craftsmanship of any of the toys or action figures that came around. But telling that story, telling the having that narrative, not just for M.A.S.K, but for anything else. It's in He-Man, it gets that bad rap where it was like, I think what was it, Toys That Made Us, where they talked about how they had to get something going, like I don't know, I forget exactly what it was, but you might be able to remember that more than I would.
I'll tell you what, they don't, when they do a show like that, they weren't Jack Olesker going into Mattel's office when they were rebooting He-Man with the New Adventures of He-Man and seeing the prototypes put in front of me for Flipshot and all the other characters, Slushhead, and all the toys that Mattel wanted from that new show. And I'll tell you what, I got a lot of blowback when I first started out on the New Adventures of He-Man. People said, "Oh, He-Man wouldn't leave and go to another world thousands of miles away and leave his family behind." You know what? I thought that's what our brave men and women in the service do every day. They leave their family, they leave their friends to go to defend liberty. I thought it was a very He-Man thing that he did to go to Primus. But when Mattel had me in there and they showed me those prototypes and they said, this is the new wave, we'd like you to feature some of these characters if it works for the story. But nobody said, push this character, push that.
Okay.
In point of fact, I said, what if I want to develop another character on my own? Critta was, I love developing Critta for New Adventures of He-Man. She was a wicked, wicked gal. And they said, that's fine, go ahead, Jack. So nobody ever pushed me or anybody that I knew to sell toys. Those were not 30-minute commercials. If people bought toys because of them, it's because partly they enjoyed the show. Because let's talk about toys for a minute. What do you do with the toys when you get them? If you're a collector that puts them on a shelf, they're carded and you never open the plastic, okay. But I think an awful lot of collectors rip open those packaging and they start having fights between Miles and Matt. You play with the toys. You're doing basically what writers do. You come up with the stories. So it was the stories that sold the toys, not the toys that sold the stories.
I like that.
I like that. And for me, that was last Tuesday, basically, playing with the toys.
And my son keeps wanting to play with them, and we do. But I'm like, yeah, they're pretty old, so don't break them yet. They're gonna go to you at some point, but just hold off a little bit longer.
Yeah.
And so I know it's appreciative to hear that story because
Yeah.
you would think that was the case. That was a narrative I had heard throughout when I was growing up. Not when I was younger, but when I was, maybe in high school and, as the internet was more of a thing, that all these things were just, 30-minute commercials. And, and I appreciate the story that is the case. It's nice to hear.
And it was across all of the toy companies. I've been doing this for almost 5 decades. I'm talking about Lego, American Greetings, those characters from Cleveland, Mattel, Kenner, Hasbro. All the executives I met with, not one single one of them said, we want you to push this toy. We need to sell this toy. None of them even said toys, okay? When they would show you the prototype, they would say, this is the character. They didn't say this is the toy, this is the character. How can you use him in your show? So I was so thrilled when I was just getting into the business to see that they had such a high regard for writers. And I was blessed to be in the business when it was really coming into what I call the golden age. And it became a golden age because they gave us the latitude. And it didn't matter if you were talking about Hello Kitty, if you're talking about the Popples, if you're talking about the Care Bears, you're talking about M.A.S.K. They gave us the latitude to tell great stories. And that's what we tried to do.
Well, thank you for that. Dave, you got another question lined up here?
I kind of have one that I came up with just on the fly. So it's kind of going to be a 2-part question. One, it seems like you seem to have a fondness for Vanessa. So I know she had a new toy out. So were you fond of the character? Is that why she did appear a lot in the racing series? And do you have a favorite character, just overall in M.A.S.K?
Well, it's a really interesting question, okay? And look, I don't have to go into it about Vanessa, okay? She's gorgeous. But on the other hand, I'm married to an Irish gal, okay, from County Cork. And my Kim was the president and CEO of United Way of a United Way agency for 6.5 years. So she's got an MBA in business, and she's an amazing businesswoman. And she's a great role model for our daughter. And when I was starting out in television, I noticed something that was interesting. There was a void of shows that had female characters in powerful positions. Now, excuse me, that's changed over the years. Thank gosh we got Powerpuff Girls and Kim Possible and other shows. But until recently, maybe 15 years ago, you didn't have females in powerful positions. And I had a daughter. And I wanted her to realize that you don't have to be a guy to have superpowers and wear a cape and do good deeds. So whenever I did a show, I always made sure that either I created characters that were female or I would put an emphasis on those characters. And our daughter, when she was growing up, I used to drill her every week. I'd say, Zoe, what can a girl do? And she'd always say, anything a boy can do. Anything a boy can do. She was like in 10th grade. I said, what can a girl do? She said, anything a boy can do. She got into high school, and I knew the answer to this. I said, could a girl fly the space shuttle? She said, Daddy, today a woman is in charge of the space shuttle. I said, could she run the space station? She said, there is a girl that is in charge of the space station. I said, what can a girl do? She said, anything a boy can do. When she graduated from high school, and she got her diploma, I walked up to her. I said, Zoe, what can a girl do? And she said, anything. She didn't say anything a boy can do. And I knew my job was done. Okay. When we went to see him,
Wipe your hands, you're done. Yeah.
I'm done. Okay. That's what the thing with kids. You put in 10 or 12 years, and then you hope they got strong wings and they can fly. When we went to see a wonderful film called Brave, okay, animated film.
I love that movie. Yeah.
Hiking girl.
Great movie.
And I'm in the theater with Zoe, and she's about 10 years old, and she's hanging onto the railing. And I said, what's going on, Zoe? She said, look what a girl can do. And when you talk about Vanessa, that's why you see her a lot in season 2, because I think even if it's a wicked character, and let me tell you, Vanessa has some redeeming traits. I think that she had a little budding romance with somebody that was in M.A.S.K. So
I'm sure some people are going to be happy to hear that's kind of what was the intention.
So I think it's important to shine a light on the female characters and let them have their time on the stage. So
wonderful.
Same thing if you look at Power Rangers. All you got to do is look at the Yellow Ranger and the Pink Ranger, okay? And
very powerful, yes.
Female empowerment is very, very, very important. So, sometimes I tell my wife, Kim, I said, you're a little bit too empowered, but I wouldn't have it any other way, So that's why there was a little bit of an emphasis on her.
Is that when you sleep?
Married, so we understand.
Well, if you say that to your wife, then you sleep on the sofa, right? Is that what happens?
So I've got business cards. I have 1,000 printed every Valentine's Day, and they all say yes, dear. Whenever she says anything, I put in the card.
I think we'll take this moment to say we all love our wives, and we know her without them. So.
No, let me tell you the secret to a happy marriage, and I'll tell all your viewers this. We've been married for 25 years, 26 years. Secret to a marriage is communication. Yes. You never go to bed angry. We've had times, everybody has, heavy discussions. We've had times we stayed up till 4 o'clock in the morning, and we finally just disagreed. We finally agreed to disagree. And the hardest thing is if you have a heated discussion with your wife or your significant other, when you're having that discussion, you have to hold the other person's hand. It changes the dynamic entirely. So that's my suggestions on a happy relationship. Okay.
Is there anything? Yeah. Is there anything you don't have any insight on here?
I don't know. Listen, you live long enough, you'll learn a lot of stuff. So, and the key is listening. That's why I love having Mr. Olesker's Bookie and a Cookie Club, because if you shut up and listen, you can learn so much from children. They're here a short time from heaven, and they don't have to worry about income taxes or life insurance or driving a car. They don't have a lot of junk in their trunk, so they can focus on the things that are really important. Kate Bobillo, the preschool teacher, she's got a sign up in her classroom, and she teaches this to the children the first day they come in. They look at that sign and it says, be kind. Okay, life's not really that complicated, So if we're all nice to each other and we stop worrying about tribalism and this and that and the other thing, and find the thousands of things that we're more similar than we are different, maybe we can start making progress on the things that really count.
Thank you for that insight. I appreciate that.
That's wonderful. Also,
I wasn't expecting this. It's the conversation.
this has been like I think we've gone way below the surface of it. Well, way more to talk about just Mass tonight. So I think this has been like probably one of the most amazing conversation I think we've ever had on this channel. So
Thank you,
All right,
David.
Dave, circle it back.
okay,
Let's
so
let's
going back
let's
to
collect
Mass.
ourselves and be nerds again.
Yeah, M.A.S.K really, going back to what I was just saying, M.A.S.K has really archetypal characters. Okay,
Mhm.
they're deep and they've got depth and they've got their interrelationships, but you know where Miles is coming from. Okay,
Mhm.
you know where Matt is coming from. You know where each of those characters is coming from. And that's the thing that I love so much about that series,
Mhm.
is that it harks to the universal chords that each of us have as children and as adults. And I think that's why, it has a large fan base. And I think that's why it's going to be a very successful feature film.
Yeah. So circling back a little bit, um, let's see. I'm just looking through our notes real quick. Bill could probably edit this a little bit out. So I'm just trying checking off kind of what kind of got said already. So let's see.
You're going to have
You
a
have a
lot of
question?
editing to do.
You have a question at the moment, Bill? I'm looking for one. So this one I'll kind of bring up, and I kind of feel like you talked about it. So the series was based around racing. Was that really a big challenge to write around, or was it something kind of fun to write around? How was you feeling about writing towards racing of all things?
Well, I'm a guy, okay?
Mhm.
And my first car when I was in college was a Mustang Mach 1. It was
Mhm.
green. It had the shackles on the hood, and like any young man growing up, I had a need for speed.
Mhm.
And when Andy and Lori Crawford told me the concept of the show, I mean, I would have liked the show in its first season of 65 episodes. Okay, it was
Mhm.
great. It was action adventure. I was coming off Hello Kitty and the Papples and the Care Bears, so I was hungry for a show that had
Mhm.
action adventure in it. But when you added in that you had racing and you had and massive RPMs, I mean, how could you not fall in love with that? So yeah, it was great. But look, I'm going to say something now that's ridiculous, okay?
Okay.
Because the Fast and Furious films, there's no question that this is one of the most monumental franchises in the history of motion pictures. But I've tried to watch two or three of them, and I love the actors that are in there, but I watch it for 5 minutes, and it's action, action, action. It's RPMs, it's crashes, it's this, it's chases, and everything. And I'm hungry for the story. Okay, I'm
Mhm.
hungry for a club fighter that's got a shot at the heavyweight
Mhm.
championship of the world. I want to know where the Rocky story is. And I don't see it in Fast and Furious. Maybe I don't hang around long enough, but
Mhm.
I don't have the time to watch that much.
Mhm.
But in M.A.S.K, one of the things that I love about it is, yes, you're absolutely right. Racing is so elemental to that season, but we still maintained the canon. We still maintained the interrelationships between the
Mhm.
characters, and you're kind of right. We had to write around the racing. And
Mhm.
that's one of the things that was very, very appealing to me. We just didn't make it 22 minutes where they're revving their engines and crashing into each other and going up into big launches over hillsides. We had story in there. So yeah, we wrote around the racing elements. It wasn't the racing element that propelled the story. Yes, it was different from the first 65, but it was still the characters that propelled the
Mhm.
series.
I know about two or three more questions, just kind of just rolling down the list. Was there ever any talk of ever doing more episodes after the 10, or was that basically done as far as
That was it.
as far as you know?
That was it. That was
Okay.
it. And that wasn't my call. It wasn't
Well, yeah, I know.
Andy and John's call. It was the toy company's call,
Hmm.
and that was that. I think it had, it had run its course. I mean, 65 episodes the first season. When I did the New Adventures of He-Man, we did 65 episodes, and it's the same thing with Mask. A
Mhm.
regular children's television series that would air on a Saturday, there were 13 episodes in a season. You had 2
Mhm.
seasons a year. So if you have 65 episodes, that's like having 5 seasons of shows.
Mhm.
So that's a lot. And you get to a point. I don't care if it's Mask. I don't care if it's, well, I shouldn't say Power Rangers because it's still going strong, but I
Mhm.
don't care if it's Mask, if it's Seinfeld, if it's Friends. You finally get to a point where you have told pretty much every story that you can tell,
Mhm.
and it's time to move on. I think they ended it at the right time. I think I loved the fact that it ended on the racing element because it was something that was a little bit different. And I think it had done
Mhm.
everything that it wanted to done. We had explored all the relationships. And I hope that when the torch is passed to whoever writes
Mhm.
the feature film, that I hope that they look at a lot of those episodes and respects the canon the same way that I
Mhm.
did.
Okay. I'm just kind of just rounding up the list. There were some characters from the first 65 episodes that didn't really carry over to the racing series. Matt's son kind of got a way reduced role, and there was a couple other characters who just didn't appear. Was that a lot due to the time constraints, or was that like did Kenner say don't use this character anymore?
Yeah, it was an interesting question. It was Kenner saying, "Don't use the character anymore," and
Hmm.
you know
Mm-hmm.
what people have to realize. I've spent a lot of my career working
Mm-hmm.
with Mattel, and Mattel takes a lot of heat, especially on He-Man.org. But
Mm-hmm.
again, these people gave me all the latitude I ever needed. But you got to remember that Mattel or Kenner or Hasbro or Lego, they are toy companies. Their job is to sell toys and to make money for their shareholders. And to their credit, as I've said repeatedly, they know that the way to do that is to let the writers have free reign and let them write the best story that they possibly can. But as toy manufacturers, they have their analytics, they have their pie charts, they have their traffic flow, time and motion studies. And when they see that a certain character is not selling the toys as much as it used to, they're going to say, well, it's time to cut it out. And that's what happened in that season. That's not a
Mm-hmm.
question of trying to censor us from saying things. When I did the New Adventures of He-Man, the reason that they took Skeletor and He-Man and sent them 10,000 light years into the future to another planet, to Primus, was because some executive at Mattel was sitting in his office one day and he said, "You know what? We're not selling as many
Mm-hmm.
man at arms. We're not selling as many battle cats as we used to." And the reality is, how many man at war, how many battle cats can you sell? A kid
Mm-hmm.
buys 4 battle cats, well, that's it. You're going to start not buying anymore. So what Mattel did with He-Man was they put it into a different venue, and we created new characters, the mutants and Critta and a lot of different characters, with the hope that children would buy into that new series and those new characters. Unfortunately, in Mattel's defense, this was before the internet, and I think that the mistake that they made was that they didn't say New Adventures as a different adventure. It's going to go to another planet, but in the next season, it's going to come back to Primus, and you lost a lot of viewers because of that. You
Hmm.
disenfranchised them, and I think that I can't complain about anything that Kenner did. I think they did everything right. They gave us a lot of latitude to tell great
Mm-hmm.
stories. I'm proud of a lot of those stories. I'm very, very proud of them.
Wonderful. Um, so the racing series seems like, for one shining moment, seems like it was supposed to be the first episode where it seems like you kind of introduced kind of like the racing concept.
Right.
There wasn't really a conclusion to the series. Was that kind of a deep directive, or was that something you guys, like, because there was some continuity between some of the episodes where they did kind of call back, like in Battle of Baja, there's like one where they mentioned one of the other episodes, the events. Um, so was there a planned continuity or a planned conclusion for it, or was basically like that they would say just kind of make sure you don't close it off and leave it all open?
Yeah, I think the last thing that you said is exactly right. You know, Seinfeld, when they ended their series, that was it. Okay,
Yeah.
that finale, that was the end of Seinfeld. And
Yeah.
I think Kenner was very, very smart with not closing the door, with not
Mhm.
with not having Miles and Matt end up being friends and they have a couple of Guinnesses together and everything's okay. They didn't do that. Okay,
Mhm.
what they did that I think was smart was they left the door open. You
Mhm.
never burn a bridge, okay? Because you never know when something's going to come back. And I
Mhm.
think that, He-Man and She-Ra, those are excellent examples. They did not close the door on that franchise. And Noelle Stevenson, who's running She-Ra, I think she's done a remarkable job and has updated it and dealing with some pro-social issues, which I think is plenty smart. I think that's good. She takes some heat for it, but I don't care. But they were able to do that because Mattel left that door open. And I
Mhm.
think the same thing is true with Kenner. That door has been open for, gosh, almost 20 years.
Mhm.
But I've got a hunch that somebody's going to walk through that door, and I got a hunch that they're going to do a fabulous motion picture. And I think you're going to have a whole new generation of fans, and
Mhm.
all of your fans are going to do a little self satisfied smile and
Mhm.
say, we stuck around, okay? And we remember it when nobody else was cheering for it or holding up the torch.
Mhm.
I think it's going to come back. But kudos to Kenner for leaving that door open. I think it was a smart move.
Never thought of it that way, actually. That's
Yeah.
a really good way of thinking about it.
Anybody could pick up. I'm not telling them how to do the feature film, but anybody could pick up Mask exactly where that racing series ended, and they could start for episode 11 and turn that into a feature film if they wanted to do that.
Mhm.
They could pick up where episode 65 left, where they were just battling each other, trying to stop venomous schemes, and carry the series on because they left that door open. It was unresolved, which I thought was very, very smart.
Okay. I think I've rounded up most of the mass questions. Bill, do you have any more questions that you see we're missing?
Well, aside from we can talk like generalization a little bit too.
Yeah.
Aside from Vanessa, like what other character did you like writing about? Was there one that you
Mhm.
really like really liked putting a story to that person?
Yeah. I liked obviously I liked Matt, obviously I liked his son because I have a great relationship with my boys. Sato was one of the characters that I really liked a lot. Sato, is that his name? I've got my list.
Sato.
Sato, yeah, Sato. I thought it was a fascinating character, which I thought should have been expanded more.
Mhm.
And the main characters, um, and you don't say this too often, but the characters of Matt and Miles were so much larger than life and so complex that it was difficult to take another character
Yeah.
and and really give them that running time within 22 minutes. Look, I joke a little bit when I talk about Vanessa, but I'll tell you the truth. I could have spin off a whole series with Vanessa. Okay. Man, she had so much depth. She had so serpentine and Byzantine and conniving and charming at the same time. I could sit down tonight and write 25 pages of the series Bible for Vanessa. Okay.
I expect
So,
that by tomorrow.
so a lot of those characters are like it, but Miles and Matt were so overpowering that they filled up the room,
Yeah,
and you got to go with what you got to go with.
makes sense. It does make sense. I guess so. You wrote some of the episodes that featured different vehicles. None of them, I don't think any of them from the first season. Maybe there was, I forget, maybe like Iguana. I forget exactly. Was there one that you liked writing about the most?
Well, you got to remember this is like 40 years ago, so I'm gonna have to look at my cheat sheet if we're going there. But when you said something that was very interesting. You said a lot of the vehicles didn't carry over from the original show, and you're right. And that goes back to the fact that you're talking about a toy company, and they knew you're not going to sell the vehicles that were in the first 65 episodes. The kids already have those vehicles.
Yep.
So it was imperative that that they came up with new vehicles. A transforming vehicle that's a crane. That's a tow truck. I think that's pretty cool. So it was very important that they came up with those new vehicles. And I remember, this is a long, long time ago. Like I said, I've written 1,200 episodes of television, but I remember, when they brought those vehicles in, and we looked at it, and I thought, wow, this is really cool stuff. And I said it earlier, and again, I think that, my gosh, how can you even, say anything negative about Transformers? But I think that one of the strong parts of M.A.S.K was that they weren't just vehicles. These were people that were behind the wheel. And man, if you took the wrong turn in Baja, you could end up being in a world of hurt. So those were the things that I loved about all the vehicles that we used in the show, and I think that was a big part of what drove the show, to use a bad pun.
I was thinking back. Sorry, go ahead, Dave. Good.
Go ahead.
Sure. All right. So you were talking earlier about your first car, and my first car was a Ford Escort. I didn't have the same power behind it, but I remember thinking I was in the Thunderhawk, even when I was 18 years old. I thought I was in Thunderhawk, even though the car got, I think it had 1 horsepower. I can't even remember exactly what it had, but I just remembered having that thought. And it was right around that time when I started to kind of rekindle my memory of M.A.S.K and kind of try to bring it around and bring it back. And eventually the episodes made it onto the internet. I think I had some old VHSs that my mom illegally copied from TV.
You mean bootleg?
So, but it was.
We have a Supreme Court case about that. It's actually legal to tape off TV.
Oh, okay. I don't know.
It went to the Supreme Court. It's really interesting about it, then.
No, thank God. All right. It was my mom, though. It wasn't me.
Yeah.
We'll
throw your mom under the bus.
Throw mom under the bus. Very nice.
But and not even that, not even just M.A.S.K, not me thinking about driving a Ford Escort and thinking it's I'm inside Thunderhawk, I'm inside Goliath. I just remember fondly and this is good. This kind of harkens back to what you were saying earlier about some of the stories that people will come up and tell you. I, my my cousins, we were very close when we were younger. We'd be down in the basement of my house. We'd be playing with M.A.S.K, Care Bears, like He-Man, and I did have the new line, and we would have all of it together, and it didn't matter that there was all these different entities.
Mhm.
It all worked, even though nobody was the same size, which I still hate to this day. But we were all using our imaginations based off of the imaginations that you had when you were writing these shows and writing from your heart, and it to this day it still goes, and
And
it's
that's the beautiful thing
Mhm.
about children's entertainment and animation, is that we can inspire those play patterns
Mhm.
in children. And I didn't know what play patterns were when I first got into them.
yeah, it's
But
it's it's a
you
hard thing to learn right away, right? That
but
so
when you say what you were doing with your car and playing with them, when when I had my son Alex, he was about 4 years old, 3 years old, and he had a fire truck bed in his nursery. And one day I'm walking down the hall. It's about 10:30 at night, and I hear these voices. What's going on? And I get near to his nursery, and I hear him saying, "You're bad. You're going to try to take over the queen's castle." And then I hear him using a different voice. He says, "I'm going to stop you from doing that. You can't do that. I'm the Black Knight. I'm going to save my queen." And I look around the corner of his nursery. He's got two fingers extended, and he's going, and
wow.
he's having a battle. And as a parent, you have 3 or 4 times when you're at a crossroad, and you can have an impact on your child that will send him in a direction for the rest of his life. I could have said to him, "Stop being so silly and go to bed. It's 10 o'clock at night." What would that have done to his creativity? What would that have done shaming him for making up a game? Instead, I'm a tough guy, but it's tough for me to talk about this. Instead, I walked into his darkened nursery, and he looked at me like this. And I said, "Honey, don't ever stop doing that." And he said, "What do you mean, Daddy?" And I bent down to his bed, and I said, "That's what Daddy used to do when he was your age. Always build your mind and your muscles by having imagination." And I remember this so well. It was 20 years ago. He looked at me and his voice quivered, and he said, "Oh, Daddy." And he reached out and he hugged me.
Mhm.
And he went on to play with Legos. He went on to build and to develop that creativity, but also turning it into a constructive way. And he ended up going to one of the greatest engineering colleges in America, Purdue University, and he became a city engineer. And now he's using those things that he did in his childhood with his imagination to make a difference in the adult world. And that's where the true joy of writing for children's television comes from. When you see people like you and your fans that are still fans as adults, when I see what's behind you, all those toys, for me, it's like discovering plutonium in my backyard. I say, "My gosh, they've still carried that torch." And
Mhm.
I'm sure that you use it every day in your real life. You don't have to tell everybody that, "Oh, it came from M.A.S.K and it came from Miles and it came from all those other things." But those are things that were building blocks in your younger years. and it carries through. And I think M.A.S.K did a big contribution in the lives of a lot of children growing up.
It really did.
It definitely influenced us.
I think, I mean, with that sentiment, I think that's a good way to close it out here.
I
Um,
think so.
That was beautiful. Is there anything else you wanna mention before we close out here? And the website will be in the description here. We'll have it. I'll flag it up here a couple times.
Great.
And
We'll get up on Facebook and then the M.A.S.K groups and plus on the website and everything.
yeah,
It's wonderful.
but no,
Somebody asked me a couple weeks ago, one of my dearest friends, and we're both getting up there now. I've still got a lot of good years in me, and I do 300 push-ups every day. I'm on my treadmill 3 days a week, and I keep myself in real good shape. I live a real clean life. I'm fortunate that I've got a wonderful, wonderful wife. And we were talking, we were waxing a little sentimental, and he said, "Jack, what would you like your legacy to be?" And I said, "Mike," I said, "I've got so much to do still." I said, "I don't want to think about my legacy too much." He said, "No, come on, you know what I mean." I said, "Well," I said, "I'll tell you, I just like people to say that he entertained them, he brought a smile to their faces, and that maybe he made their days a little bit brighter." So if people will say that and look back on, gosh, all those shows that I've done, and it makes them smile a little bit, and they were a little bit happier because of what I did, then I'm blessed far beyond what I deserve. So, like I said before, writers, producers, directors, and actors, they're nothing without fans. I'm so grateful to you for keeping that torch going for M.A.S.K, and I'm so grateful to all of your followers on your great website for keeping the faith. And let's get that feature film made.
Well, that sentiment, I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
And Dave, I appreciate your time as well. And for all of us here on this group chat, we'll talk to you later.
Great. Thank you for the time. I appreciate it,
Thank
gentlemen.
you. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Spectrum's got such super vision.